This week, Pat Brown and I have a really interesting topic for you that has to do with the lineup and weight instruction. Maybe one of the most misunderstood instructions pilots get from air traffic control. Before we get into it, I've got to say we really appreciate the subscribers. Subscribership has been growing, wonderful comments after each of the videos, and it's just fantastic having you all along for the ride so we can talk about all sorts of things about aviation. And in this episode, lineup and weight, and what's the flight instructor's responsibility for prepping a student for their check ride? Let's get into it. One of the things we teach in Rusty Pilot seminars, which have been so successful, 12,000 pilots back in the air,
Right.
is the change from position and hold to line up and wait. But there was such an interesting video that popped up this week of three instructional flights, two in the air, one on the ground, where the one on the ground was told to line up and wait,
Right.
and they just kept waiting. And what's weird, well, normal actually, but there's clearly a changeover in the tower because we went from a male controller that issued the lineup and wait to a female controller. And I have a feeling that this is just one of those things where there's just an oversight. You know, there's things going on in the cab and there's churning over shifts. And somebody just missed the fact that they cleared somebody to line up and wait and forgot about it. But the instructor and student on the runway waited several minutes until there was actually an airplane on short final and they had to say, "Hey, I'm still here." That's something we have to be cognizant of, don't you think? That once you get out there, line up and wait, a minute is a long time. I don't think I'd be willing to sit there that long.
Yeah. I look at that video you sent me the link to, and what was it? 4 or 5 minutes they sat there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I mean, that's an eternity. That is literally, and it could have been an eternity, uh, but it is. And I got to tell you, I don't like lineup and wait instructions. Um, I'm very cautious if I accept one. Um, but rarely, it's almost like sitting at a traffic light,
Yep.
a red light. There comes a point and the red light is kind of like, come on, come on. Come on. And it's the same thing with a lineup and wait deal. After about 20 seconds or so, I'm getting a little bit nervous about having my back to the final approach. 30 seconds for sure, I probably will query the controller, but 4 to 5 minutes, and I get it. It's it's a training flight, and the instructor is probably a little unsure what's going on. Perhaps maybe trying to demonstrate some patience so that the student doesn't get anxious, or that the student doesn't pick up a bad habit, for example, of bugging the tower for takeoff. I mean, I get all of that, but 5 minutes.
Well, I think it's worth keeping in mind. Why are we doing that lineup and wait? And first of all, you don't have to accept it.
That's
You can
right.
say, no, I'm going to wait. But that's usually done at really busy airports where they want to get you out. And in this case, you've got three aircraft from the same company, apparently, who are all involved in flight training. And that's great.
Yeah.
But when you get out on that runway to line up and wait, it's probably because somebody just landed and is rolling out and they can't clear you to take off until that aircraft is clear of the runway.
Right.
So I'm keeping an eye on that. And yeah, once they clear the runway, if another 10, 15 seconds goes by and I'm still sitting there with no call, that's when I'm going to query the tower and say, "Hey, I'm here. Remember me?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when you have a situation like you had, where obviously you had a second voice come on the frequency. That might be a pretty good clue that, hey, so like you said, I'm still here. But that's a situational awareness thing. And but once again, you don't know what's going on in the cockpit and the trainer either that was sitting there.
Hmm.
They could be having a conversation about, I mean, maybe it was a first time student or a second, who knows,
Yeah.
or a first or second hour student, and they're talking about, if the engine quits at 1,000, at 1,000 feet, I'm going to do this, or if it quits on the runway, I'm going to do that. I mean, who knows what was going on in the cockpit at the time? So it's very easy to see how that 5 minutes could have elapsed without either one of the people in that airplane realizing that it had been 5 minutes. There's so many things we don't know.
Yeah, and I think the lesson in this really, without pointing fingers at anybody, I'm not
Yeah,
blaming anybody for anything. It was handled reasonably well. Nobody got hurt. Life is good. Aircraft went around. The aircraft that was lining up and wait cleared the runway. But it was a case of, as you say, the CFI gets out there and maybe loses track of time while they're talking to the student, trying to get them set up. The controllers are having a shift change, and maybe there's some communication that didn't happen that should have, because that second voice, the female controller, clearly was unaware there was somebody lined up and waiting.
that's true.
We're just humans. People forget things, but you're the one sitting out there on the runway. That's a great time to be really focused. We're not waiting for something now. We are committed.
Yeah.
So we want to stay on top of this and not just kind of chatter away until we hear our number. We want to be all right. I'm in the next minute, I'm either going to be released or I'm going to clear this runway.
Yeah, and there's another thing, element, factoid missing here as we're chatting too, and is that in order for a controller to be able to issue a lineup and wait directive, um, there have to be two controllers in the tower cab.
That's interesting. I'm
So
not sure I knew that.
yeah,
Maybe I did. Let's not admit in public I didn't know something. Okay.
Jamie, I'm telling you, as far as I've been able to tell, there's only about six things you don't know.
Well, I think the follow on to this is clearly a controlled airport. There's a tower. They're dealing with ground. They're dealing with tower. That's great. I will never do line up and wait at a non-towered
No,
airport, and I
no,
see
no, no.
people do it all the time.
Yeah,
And I think it's tremendously dangerous because, yeah, I know the terminology and I'm getting out there, but there's nobody watching my butt. I
yeah.
have no idea what's behind me now when I pull out on that runway and I'm waiting for somebody to clear. But is there somebody doing a short approach that I didn't see? Is there something else happening I'm unaware of? At a towered airport, you don't have to accept it, but if you do, stay on the ball. At a non towered airport, frankly, I'm astonished that people will give themselves permission to line up and wait. It's just too risky for me.
I totally agree with you, and there are actually case histories, to studies, accident reports, et cetera, where that has happened, and there have been two. An airplane lands on top of another one, or has to execute, more commonly execute a go around.
Mhm.
I've seen that a couple of times at my home airport, which is a fairly busy non-towered field. Great safety record, and terrific pilots that fly out of that. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and as you said earlier, and I've seen some go arounds because of people just have brain farts. And can I say that on TV?
I believe you can. You
Okay,
can say it twice if you want to.
brain fart, really?
Well, and the other one is we're not thinking of the pilots on final. Yeah, you've been cleared to land, and that's great, but you still have a responsibility to keep your eyes open. And if there's somebody on the runway, don't
Right.
land over the top of them because you don't know if they know you're there. They could release brakes and power up and be right under you as you're landing.
Well, that's
Ju-
similar to. I didn't mean to interrupt you here, but that's similar to the Southwest Airlines and FedEx issue at Austin.
Mhm,
We're doing this in October. This is about what, 3 months ago, maybe 2 months ago, if you remember,
mhm.
where there was, I think it was a Southwest Airlines airplane had been, I think, cleared to take off. Yet there was a FedEx on relatively short final, and the FedEx had to go around, and it was almost a really really bad day for everybody.
Boy, speaking of that, just out in your neighborhood the other day, out at Hobby, we had a Hawker and a Cessna that met at midfield. And boy, that seriously, just a second or two, one way or the other, that could have been a real tragedy. And again, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. That's not my role. But we need to have a situational awareness before we advance those throttles or before we get on the runway. What's happening here? And was I actually cleared to go? That's that Tenerife thing with KLM and Pan Am. If you're not absolutely sure you were cleared and you don't see a clear runway, there's nothing wrong with pushing that button and just, can I get some clarification? You let me go, right?
Yeah. Yes, and the same thing with the landing clearance. Excuse me. I've done check rides where, especially at one of the really really busy airports where I conduct a bunch of rides, where I'm watching so many things when during a check ride. Um, I can recall a couple of times where we've turned final and I actually turned to the applicant and said, "We've been cleared to land, right?"
Hmm.
Just because even I've had some problems. I mean, I'm not trying to imply I'm a Superman or anything like that, but I'm fairly alert when we're doing this kind of stuff. But even when you're tuned into it and when you're all in, you can still be distracted and it only takes a nanosecond. It only takes a nanosecond. How long does it take to say Cessna 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clear to land?
Yeah.
Not very long. And if I'm making a note because of something I want to discuss with the applicant or something before I forget to do that, and that comes up, especially if it's in a rapid fire communication, I've had to ask a few times. And
Yeah, and I've actually had the situation where I was flying an airplane 152 uniform Charlie, and there was somebody else in the pattern 2 uniform Charlie,
oh,
where
yeah,
you've really got to pay attention, and the controller has to use the full call sign because in that case there was only one digit different between the two of us. And
I'll tell you one quick story. We were flying from the west side of Houston to the east side of Houston. This is several years ago in a 182, I think. And there was a caravan that was flying from the east side of Houston to the west side of Houston. And just like you, there was maybe one letter or one number, I think it was a number difference. And several times, the controller called for us, and the other guy answered once. And I might have answered for the other guy. I don't remember all the details at this point, but I remember finally the controller said, "Okay, look, you guys are just one digit apart." He said, "All right, 182, you're the little Cessna. Caravan, you're the big Cessna. So little Cessna do this, big Cessna do that," and it solved the issue.
there's historical precedence for this because that's how the president's airplane became Air Force One.
Yeah,
Because one time the president's airplane, before they called it Air Force One, had a very similar call sign to another airplane, and it could have gotten ugly. So yeah,
interesting.
that identification thing is a real deal. So I think the takeaway from this, Pat, is whether you're in the cab or whether you're in the aircraft, have some situational awareness, verify that you actually got the instruction you need. And that's part of why we do the read back. We don't just go,
Yeah,
okay, we read back Cessna 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cleared for departure 27.
yeah, yeah,
But no matter who you are there, even if you're the student, it's okay to say, are we supposed to be sitting out here this long?
yeah. Trust but verify.
Absolutely. Well, as long as we're talking about this professionalism, situational awareness, all that, what kind of frustrations are there? You're a DPE.
Yeah.
When you get an applicant coming, what kind of issues are there that maybe are completely within the control of the CFI guiding the student and it's just not up to snuff? Let's say that. What kind of stuff walks through your door where the CFI could have prepared this student to actually go, and maybe the issue prevents them from taking the ride?
I would say 90% of the time, and by the way, 90% of statistics are made up 45% of the time. Uh,
Thank you, Pat.
thought you'd be interested in that. Um, the vast majority of turned down check rides are because of paperwork. Um, there is some element of maybe hours have been miscounted or something that they don't have enough hours, but or misinterpreted easy for me to say misinterpretation of a reg, but most of the time it's missing an endorsement or not having a signed IACRA 8710, which is the application that they're supposed to bring with us. I ask for a signed 8710 because if IACRA goes down and we can't do it online, if I don't have a signed 8710, we can't proceed with the check ride.
And
IACRA is
that has
pretty.
happened. IACRA
Oh
has
yeah.
gone down for an extended period of time a
Oh
few
yeah. Yeah.
times.
Yeah. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I turned down a couple of rides over the last 2 or 3 weeks because of misunderstanding of the way the commercial reg 61-129 is written. There's a section in there that says 10 hours of solo time, and the way it's written is it either has to be for real solo when the applicant's by himself or herself in the airplane, or performing the duties of pilot in command while accompanied by a certificated flight instructor. But in that case, it can't be logged dual and it can't be logged solo. It's got to be logged PIC time because it's not solo and it can't
Mhm.
be dual according to the reg. And the problem, oh, and there's also your night time and night takeoffs and landings that are part of that same solo time that can either be done solo for real or with the CFI on board as long as you're performing the duties of PIC. And the way the reg is written, that it's either or, not or any combination thereof.
Ah,
So you can't do your 300-mile cross country solo and do your nighttime and landings with an instructor or vice
okay.
versa. It has to be
Is there
either
a
or.
proactive way a CFI can validate and verify what they're doing when they send somebody? I mean, this is not all just conjecture, right? This is written down somewhere.
Well, the specific interpretation I'm talking about with regard to the solo versus PIC with a CFI on board is the Grannis interpretation, if I remember right, GRANNIS, Grannis. But really, if you read the regs, and our FISDO will be the first to say they're poorly written, but if you read the reg and carefully, it does say either or, not or
Okay.
combination thereof. And common sense would, and I realize sometimes it's not so common, but common sense would dictate if it says performing the duties of PIC, then the time needs to be logged as PIC. It can't be logged as solo because you have an instructor on board,
Hmm.
but it can't be logged as dual because the instructor is not supposed to be teaching. He or she is basically just a sack of potatoes sitting there. But you know as well as I do, instruction goes on.
Yep.
I mean, you'd have to be a moron not to believe instruction goes on, but it can't be logged, and the CFI can't log it either.
This might be a good topic for us to cover sometime because CFIs, they do have an important job and it is one that carries a fairly high amount of responsibility.
Yeah,
But when you first come to the job, you don't know all these things.
yeah,
There's a lot that you could benefit from some mentorship, and I can't
yeah.
think of a better mentor than Pat Brown.
Yeah. Well, you're very kind. Yeah, I'm trying to model myself after you, Jamie. That there's only about 7 or 8 things I don't know. I'm trying to get to the six.
Between us, we're so close. Well, hey, man, I appreciate it. I do think these are important topics, and I hope it starts a conversation at flight schools all across the country
Yeah.
where people start talking about what does line up and wait really mean, and how do I protect myself if I accept one? As a CFI, how do I make sure that when I sign my students off, they really are ready to go? And as a student, how do I kind of have some insight to make sure I'm asking the CFI the right questions? Am I really good to go?
Yep.
I think
Excellent
those are all
points.
worth things we should probably cover at some point.
We'll talk whenever you want. I'm ready.
You're the man. Pat, you have a great day. I know you got a check ride in just a little while. So go have some wonderful blue skies and calm air. And I will catch up with you and the folks watching next time right here on their personal device.